News Talk 1540 KXCL, where Iowa comes to talk, and good morning. Cedar Valley author Cherie Dargan has published her third book in a recent series. This morning, we reconnect with Cherie, who is a former instructor at Hawkeye Community College. Good morning.
Good morning, Tim.
The latest book is called The Promise. Remind us of the details and the theme of the series.
All right. Well, the theme is about strong women, strong families through generations. And so the name of the series, Grandmother's Treasures, might lead one to think it's all one grandmother, but basically each book is a separate grandmother's story. And there are some themes throughout the series. In this book, we talk a great deal about grief, loss, depression, and families coming together to support people who are in those states. And we also talk about war and the effects of war and the long-term effects.
For those that aren't familiar with the earlier books, they're told across a couple of time periods in each instance. And tell us about what historical period you're going back to in this book, as well as the modern equivalent.
Yes, the first book is set during 2012, and I did that for a reason. I had people who were involved in World War II, so that was the gift. In the second book, The Legacy, we have the time period of the American Civil War, and the story that starts in the gift continues on. So the contemporary story, we meet a young girl named Gracie. She's in her mid-20s. We meet her extended family. She goes through a difficult breakup. And then in book 2, she has a new boyfriend. At the end of book 2, spoiler alert, they get married. And as book 3 starts out, they start off on their honeymoon in a borrowed RV, and they're going to explore some Civil War battlefields to kind of trace her ancestor, Michael O'Connor's regiment's move through the South during the Civil War. But they get to their very first overnight stop, and one of her cousins brings some wonderful barbecue and an old hope chest, and they have a new puzzle to figure out when they get back to Iowa. And basically, the cousin found a hidden compartment in this hope chest that contains a packet of love letters written by a soldier, Charlie, to his girlfriend, his sweetheart, Mary, back in Iowa. And so we are going to be talking about World War I, or as they called it, the Great War. They thought it was going to be the war to end all wars. And of course, we know that wasn't exactly right. And as we get into this book, we have a chance to explore kind of the culture. And again, I'm a literature teacher, so I have a couple of literary pieces set in that war. You probably have heard of that poem, In Flanders Fields. And it's talking about a soldier who dies in France and doesn't want to be forgotten and doesn't want the lessons of the war forgotten. So it is the era of 1917, right before we enter the war. And then it goes on through the early 20s and covers things like the 19th Amendment passing. And of course, the horrible pandemic, what they called the Spanish flu, that killed so many people, ironically, killed more soldiers than died from the war.
We're talking with Cedar Valley author Cherie Dargan. Her recent book is The Promise, the third book in a series that originally debuted in 2022, and this most recent book just out in recent weeks. And we've reached the 100th anniversary in relatively recent terms of so many of these milestone events that you're writing about, whether that's World War I in the last decade, whether that's the Spanish flu or the events of the 1920s into the new decade. Has that made this an easier project because there's a lot of commemoration, a lot of thought and reflection on events that happened a century ago?
Yes and no. Let's remind the readers I am a retired teacher. And I like to say there's a little history, there's a little mystery, and some faith, hope, and love. I hope to educate my readers just a little bit, but not make it too painful. And there's not going to be a test at the end. And I hope to entertain, but I also hope to inspire. The stories are still being discovered. People are still digging around in the attic and finding grandma's journal. I wanted to capture that sense that in many ways, most of us did not learn that much about World War I. The focus was more on World War II. And so I have my young literature teacher, Gracie, ask her class, why should we care about a war that took place almost 100 years ago? She challenges them to talk to their grandparents, to talk to anybody in their family who has any memory of hearing stories from their grandparents about the war. And she says the next time you're in one of those Iowa cemeteries, and of course, it's still a ritual in Iowa, isn't it, every May, for families to go out and decorate graves? And how often have we all walked by those World War I graves and not really connected with the idea that we had over 100,000 Iowa soldiers who enlisted and about 56,000 who went overseas. And we had over 3,500 casualties. And of course, more were injured. And we had some very notable people. We had women who died. And the other thing I wanted to talk about in this book was what it was like on the home front. We often think of women stepping up in World War II, but women stepped up in World War I. They kept shops open, they helped on the farm, they did all the things they could to fill in the places of the absent fathers, brothers, sons, friends. And also, we had a lot of voluntary rationing. We had to feed a starving Europe. And so I found these incredible posters, and I've got some examples in the book talking about how farmers, how shopkeepers, how everyone could pitch in. So they had meatless days. They had posters with all kinds of meal plans and recipes for using things other than wheat to make bread. Something as simple as not having wheat, things that we take for granted. So it was fascinating. I learned a great deal. It helps to have a husband who's a retired librarian. Shout out to Mike, because he was a tremendous resource in this effort.
You mentioned people finding journals or finding documents, things that might tell their own stories. I'm curious, as you've shared these books with audiences, whether that's in person at events or whether that's just hearing feedback from readers, if you've heard from many people who either before or after reading one of these books has said, that's me. I found information that I never had before that changed my perspective on my ancestors.
Yes. In fact, I have a set of letters from a soldier in Vietnam home to his girlfriend that a friend gave me that I'm going to use in a future book. I had another friend, a neighbor, who brought me some incredible old letters from an ancestor. I mean, this is from the 1850s. They're hard to read. I had to scan them in and darken them up to be able to read them, but beautiful cursive handwriting. Another shout out for people who can still read cursive handwriting. If you're going to read those old journals, that's a skill you need. But yes, yes. And of course, I'm using my mother's notes. She had done a lot of genealogy work, and in her retirement, she wrote essay after essay about her family. So I've learned a great deal.
Well, Cherie, thanks so much for being back with us again. Congratulations on this latest book, The Promise, just out. It's the third in a series of books called Grandmother's Treasures, and we'll wish you well as you continue on with the series.
Yes, well, I've already submitted book 4, which is set in the Great Depression when Iowa lost so many farm families lost farms. So that might be out this spring yet.
Cherie Dargan is a Cedar Valley author, former instructor at Hawkeye Community College, and our guest on the station where Iowa comes to talk, News Talk 1540 KXCL.